morning. It's a bit windy out here today, so I may end up having to voice over some of this stuff here. We'll see how this goes. So for those of you who are new, I'm Matthew. We're the Scoops. And I wanted to kind of go over, well, what we've learned in this past year, learning how to garden and just making those initial steps towards our goal of homesteading. Now, I think one of the more important things to keep in mind when you're first starting out, especially if you're starting out with gardening and you have the notion of growing your own vegetables in order to save money, there's something you need to really know about this. It probably won't work out the way you think. Getting started in gardening, especially if you're trying to do it on a larger scale and you have really no knowledge, is probably going to be a little on the pricey side, especially if you're doing like container gardening and you don't have access to locally produced soil and things of that nature. And if you're having to kind of mix your own, there's some cost behind it, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes are going to cost you. Whether it's because you decided to plant something at the wrong time of the year, didn't give it the proper sunshine, maybe you're overwatering, you're underwatering, and it's not necessarily your fault. You're new at this, you're learning. The other thing is, buying stuff started versus starting it yourself from seed. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying starts. I do it all the time. And getting started, I did that a lot. But it is going to cost a little bit more than if you start it yourself. But if you don't have a setup for seed starting, or you're not really, again, you're just getting started here and you don't know how to do it, maybe that's your, option, your best option at the moment. Just know that it's going to cost you a little bit more. And even as you get better at it, you've gone through your first year, you get a hang of it. Like one thing that I've somewhat recently realized is our growing seasons. Your growing season is specific to your location. One thing I keep hearing people talk about a lot is your gardening zones. For example, we are a 9B. All that really means is that our coldest average temperature, or average coldest temperature, is like 25 degrees. But that's it. That doesn't really have anything to do with the actual season itself. Which brings me to the next thing, and that's learning your frost dates. There's a couple of things with that. Again, like I just mentioned, your gardening season, your growing seasons, just like your frost dates, are specific to your area. But just because you have a projected last frost date or a projected first frost date, you still want to kind of keep an eye on the weather forecasts as you get closer to those dates, and even sometimes past them. Perfect example is our projected last frost date was January 18th. It is now February 27th, and we just had frost warnings just last week. And our temperatures have been going all over the place, which has kind of put a bit of a damper on getting things out here to start hardening them off and trying to get some of my transplants into the containers. Just keep in mind, Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. You just kind of have to go with it and do your best to protect the plants, and you just have to kind of adapt a little bit. A big thing to keep in mind, though, is if you're hitting the correct season or about the right season with your frost dates and things of that nature, you're providing the plants the sunlight that they need and a soil mixture that's good and rich for them, the plants want to grow. And sometimes they're going to grow with or without your permission, I guess you could say. When it comes to the failures, as I said before, it's not your fault. And sometimes it's absolutely not your fault. You may have two plants, identical species, in the same type of soil, with the same type of sun exposure, same watering, everything, and one plant's going to take off just like a monster, and the other one's going to die. And that may have been no fault other than the plant itself. Something happened during the germination. It just didn't develop properly. It didn't get proper root development, and it may have been something that is 100% out of your control. Just like the one that decided to become a monster, again, may have been out of your control. You may not have actually had anything to do with that other than you gave it the opportunity to thrive. All right, so it can be expensive. It can be time consuming. It takes a lot of work sometimes, especially when dealing with pest problems, or it's time for harvest, things of that nature. It takes a certain amount of attention and commitment on your side of things, which is why the next part I think is so important is if this is something you want to do, well, then it has to be something you really want to do. Now, there's nothing wrong with you giving it a try and you finding out that this just isn't for you. That's just the case of it. Sometimes this type of lifestyle, or even when it comes to just simple things like gardening, even if it's just flower gardening, isn't for everybody. And that's okay. And if you try it and it's just not for you, well, then you at least you know that this isn't your path. But if you truly believe it is, then you need to give it your best. Now, when it comes to the type of gardening, as far as whether you're doing raised bed gardening, container gardening, in-ground gardening, no-till gardening, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. That's more of a personal preference, I would say, combined with your personal needs. For example, we do everything pretty much in grow bags. And the reason being is, I've stated this before, this is a rental. We don't own this property. And so putting in-ground gardens was a no-go. Even using large raised bed gardens, they were a little hesitant on that. And so I suggested grow bags because it's something that's easily removed. It's all contained, and once we finally move, we can take all of this out without any kind of actual change to the landscape itself for the most part. And they were completely fine with that. And so that's why we do grow bags. If I was able to do in-ground gardening, I would. I would love to have some raised garden beds that I've built. I think they're quite amazing, and I've seen some really beautiful setups. Now, as far as the type of containers, if you're going to go container gardening, the type of containers to use, again, that's going to be personal preference. We primarily use Vivosun grow bag. You can actually find the link in the description down below to our Amazon affiliate link. And that's not to say that there aren't better bags or less expensive bags. These sometimes can get a little pricey. I look for when Amazon happens to do like their flash sales and such. Go with what you feel you need to use and what's affordable to you. Perfect example, we recently found these little plastic planters. They're pretty thin, they're not very durable. They were at one of the local dollar stores. So these were, I don't know what they call it, a dollar store, but they were like $1.25. They've got little, holes in them, or little X spots on them, so you can drill your holes for drainage, and you can grow stuff. We're going to be using these for flowers. We're not going to be growing vegetables in these. Now, the reason I'm not growing vegetables in these is I don't know how safe the plastic is going to be for vegetable growing, but for flowers, if all you're trying to do is a flower gardening, something like this would be just fine. I've also seen people who've created like herb gardens, for example, in kiddie pools. There's several videos online of people doing this, and if that's your option, then by all means get after it. I would rather start gardening at a small scale with a kiddie pool than to not start at all. We started with little stackable planters that we picked up from Aldi's. We actually had tomatoes. I had some rosemary that grew in that. We actually grew a little bit of a handful of radishes in it. That is an option. Use what you have available. Don't let trends or thinking that you have to have a specific brand or type of container deter you from gardening. Use what you have available. You can get it to grow, and as time goes on, perhaps you can get into the type of containers or in-ground gardening that you're eventually looking to get into. The first thing, though, is get started. Get to learning how to garden. Now let's talk more about the bigger picture for us. So for us, it's not just about gardening and learning how to garden. That's a big part of this. So quick kind of a background on us and our goals real quick. For those of you who don't follow us, if you don't, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That would be much appreciated. We currently live in the city. As a matter of fact, we live around the Phoenix area in Arizona. Our goal is to buy property and build a farm from scratch. We want a homestead where we grow our own food, as much of it as possible, and we want to live a more self-sustainable lifestyle. Now again, like I said, we live in the city. We're in technically a suburb area, and obviously I can't have a cow back here. I can't have goats back. I can't even have chickens actually back here due to the HOA. Even with my gardening, there's even still some limitations on that, not just because of being only able to use container gardening, but our plants can only reach so high. So like, for example, growing giant sunflowers as an example, like the big mammoth ones, we're technically not allowed to do that because those things would exceed the height of the wall. So things like certain types of trees and things of that nature we can have, but some of our plants aren't allowed to grow that tall. So we are a little limited on what we're able to do here. Needless to say, we are somewhat limited on what we're able to start learning hands-on. And if you happen to be in that same kind of situation, don't let that stop you. There are still things that you can do to begin learning skills that you might need. Again, if you're able to get a small garden going, do that. One thing that we keep wanting to do and just haven't had a chance to is canning. So let's say you happen to be in an apartment, you don't have any kind of balcony space that you can grow on, but you have access to local farmers or even like a local farmers market. You can still begin practicing preservation techniques by picking up locally grown produce, and you can begin canning them, because for the most part all you really need for canning, obviously, of course, you have your jars and things of that nature, but as far as space, you need your kitchen. So you can begin working on that, along with, talking about the kitchen, learning more from scratch homemade recipes. Learn how to cook, because that is the ultimate goal. If you're trying to grow and raise your own food, eventually you have to eat it. So cooking's a big part of it. That is kind of the in-game side of things, is eating and partaking in what you've grown. And I'll tell you right now, the first time you harvest something successfully and you taste it, I don't know if it's just because it's homegrown or if it's because you know how much work you've put into it, it tastes so much better. I'm telling you, it's something else. It's amazing. Now, speaking of that, that's actually another area that we're slowly going to be working on this year, actually, is, well, eating. And eating more seasonally, and eating stuff that either we're growing or has been locally produced. We're still trying to make our moves to that, and that's something to also keep in mind, too. If you're like us and you live in the city and your goal, your dream is to have your own farm where you're living life to its fullest on your terms. That is a lifestyle change. You get used to all of the local resources being right at your fingertips. Everything from fast food delivery to, I literally can walk to a grocery store right now because I'm maybe a mile away. And so you have all of those conveniences that, you move out to a rural area. I grew up in rural Arkansas. Very rural Arkansas. And you don't have those conveniences. So you have that aspect that is a lifestyle change. Along with that comes with cooking at home more regularly. There's days where, like, for example, right now we work 2 jobs, me and Monty both. And the second job is, of course, to help fund our purchase of property in the next couple of years. That does not leave a lot of time. And so there are days where, maybe it's, for example, the weekend, because we don't work on the weekends, and you're exhausted, you're tired, and you just don't feel like cooking. And so it's so easy to either, just jump online and order something, or just hop in the car and drive somewhere and just order something. And I'll be honest, we do it. We do it all the time. But we're working towards trying to change that. One thing that we could work on to help kind of curb that would be to not only get into canning, but get into canning meal preparation. Whether it's I'm making sauces and canning those for, like spaghetti or something like that, or even canning beef stew. Like, you can make beef stew, can it, and next time you want to have some stew, or if you're running low on time, you just pop that sucker open, you throw it in a pot, you turn it on, and you warm it up. It's just canned beef stew, and you have a meal at your hand. So meal preparation and canning with that type of mindset will really help, I think, at least with us. And so that's something that, if that's something you might be struggling with, give that a try. And if you do, comment down below. Let me know how it works out for you. Maybe you've got some additional ideas for meal prep canning that you already do. I'd like to hear about it. But again, like I said, it is a lifestyle change. And with that in mind, just like with gardening on a larger scale, doing a full lifestyle change and going from urban living to rural living on a farm that you've built, that's kind of night and day. And it's something that you have to want. Like, with us, and part of this gardening has kind of helped solidify it. It's something that we know this is the path we're supposed to be on. We know this is our journey, and we're headed in the right direction. And because we know that with such conviction, it helps when things go wrong in the garden, because I know that mistakes happen, but I know I'm on the right path. And vice versa, when something grows really well, like I just harvested some cauliflower this morning, and I'm going to eat throughout the week in my salads I use for lunch. That's amazing. And that helps even bolster you even further. But you have to want it. You have to know that this is for you. So like with a lot of other people, of course, we watch other homesteaders online. There's several of them that I really enjoy. But I'm going to say right now, the one that we enjoy the most and the one that really helped set us on this path is Roots and Refuge. And if you haven't checked them out, check out Roots and Refuge. They are just so amazing. And Jess over there has this philosophy that we kind of began trying to incorporate, and that's the idea of turning your waiting room into a classroom. And that kind of goes along with what I was saying earlier about, if you're in an apartment and you can't grow anything, but maybe you can learn how to can. Or maybe you do have a space that you're allowed to do some type of growing in, even if you have to maintain or contain it in grow bags. There's something that you could be doing right now to help build skills or improve on skills that maybe you already have, but maybe you could work on. Don't let like space limitations or lifestyle limitations, well, limit you. All right, find ways to get around it. Find ways to continue your growth, because I believe that it's worth it. If this is something you really truly believe that you should be doing, then it's worth it. And technically, that type of mentality should be used across anything. It doesn't have to just be homesteading and gardening. It could be anything. Maybe you're trying to become, a graphic designer or a computer programmer, or maybe your goal is to open up an automotive shop and begin working on, all of your local neighbors' vehicles, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you're wanting to get into real estate. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, you can be learning right now skills that will help you down the road. You can begin learning right now regardless of your situation. You just need to want it. So one last thing before I go, and this is more of just a gardening tip, I guess you could say, because it's something I'm doing this morning. So I've got some plants out here, specifically tomato and zucchini plants, that I've brought out this morning to begin hardening them off. Now, it was a little rough this morning because it's been so windy and the temperature was actually a little cooler than I expected. Hardening off your plants is something that if you've started your plants indoors, you're going to want to do, because they've not been subjected to outdoor conditions. And I'm not talking just temperature. The wind itself can actually do harm to your plants if they're not used to being moved around like that. That being said, one thing that I have seen people do, and I've thought about implementing myself, is actually adding a small fan to your starts to kind of simulate air movement. It doesn't actually simulate, it actually is air movement. I haven't tried that yet. I might actually try that on some of my upcoming starts here. We actually have watermelon and cucumber. I'm hoping to actually get into some trays this afternoon. But what you generally do is you start off by you bring them outdoors, whether it's late in the evening, early in the morning, whenever you have a moment, and you'll bring them out for let's say 20 minutes or so. And you'll just keep doing that and keep doing that and keep doing it. And as you feel the plants are able to take it up a notch, leave them out a little bit longer. Get them exposed to that sunlight, get them exposed to just the general ambient conditions of being outside. And you keep doing that until you can leave them out pretty much for hours on end, pretty much all day. And once you're able to do that, they should be okay to transplant by then. Now, that does vary from plant to plant. Some plants you can't even transplant. They just shock too hard. And those, of course, are ones that you're going to start outside. But if you're starting inside and you plan on bringing them out and transplanting them, you're going to want to harden them off first. So be sure to look into various information on hardening off whatever plant that it is that you're doing, whether it's tomatoes or, again, I got zucchini out here as well. Maybe you're doing broccoli, whatever the case may be. All right, it's a little later in the day here. We had some stuff to take care of back here, and I forgot to hit record. So we cleaned up the tree back here finally, which should open up a little extra sunlight into the gardening section right over in here. It was getting a little overgrown anyway. It needed to be pruned back for quite some time. So anyway, back to what I was talking about before. When you're just getting started out, again, with the gardening, or if you're trying to get into homesteading or anything like that, and you have no experience like us, we have no idea what we're doing. We're just trying to figure it out as we go along. And that's really all you can do, is try to gather as much information as you can, as much good information as you can, and put it to practice. Trial and error. That's truly a wonderful teaching tool. Figuring out what failed and how to fix it, and hope that you don't repeat that. So with that in mind, I want to thank all of you who have commented or messaged us on our, whether it's on here or our social media pages. All of you who have been giving us advice as we've started this journey here. Again, just really, truly thank you. You're amazing. With that in mind, I think that's going to do it for us today. So thank you for hanging out with us and letting me kind of rant a little bit. Sometimes you get something weighing on your mind and you have to get it up off your chest. You feel that it's important to say out loud, and that's one of the benefits of doing this. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That helps us continue to grow. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.